So Roger, there's a saying I've seen on a lot of your branding for Amaze where it's like mindfully grown, no pesticides, living soil. Let's talk about the no pesticides and mindfully grown aspect of that.
So we've been pretty fortunate so far to where we only have to use like some beneficial fungus, some beneficial insects. Thanks a lot for those from Growers House. They've been able to stabilize populations inside the building, and we have to regularly inoculate them. Very little.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are getting like weekly shipments from us of beneficial insects that you unleash here so that you don't have to spray chemicals on these plants.
That's right. Yeah, we apply them once in veg, usually per flower room, and they usually will hang out with the plants all the way through flower, keeping a lot of the bad pests below the threshold to where we can avoid using chemicals and things that leave residues and maybe some other unwanted effects on the plants. We've been using Staffline and Aureus from Growers House, and that was a fire batch for Aureus you guys had last summer.
Nice. They were they were really hungry or something?
They were a good batch, dude. Good population, good, nice hungry bugs. No, they were well packed. They were fresh. They all arrived whole, healthy, happy, ready to rock.
Fire batch of beneficial insects to match the fire batch of cannabis. Huh?
They're directly related.
You don't have fire bugs, you don't have fire weed.
Right.
Calling all home growers. Get ready to light up the Growers Gauntlet 2024. The ultimate challenge for those with the self-proclaimed green thumb. This is the community grow competition for those who want to put their skills to the test. Step 1. Jump into our Discord server. This is where the community's buzzing and all the growing action goes down. Then it's time to pick your strain. Whatever you choose decides your team, so choose wisely. Third, head on over to Seedsman with your team's discount code clutched in your green fingers. Snag those genetics without burning through your stash. Remember, growers, you gotta get those seeds in the dirt by April 20th. But feel free to start as soon as you've got your seeds popped and ready to rock. Now let's talk judging. It's by the people, for the people, with the final contenders chosen by our very own content creators. They're looking for that grow that's got it all. Think beautiful buds, killer updates, creativity, and just top shelf quality all around. Make sure you got everything trimmed and tidy by August 1st for the harvest. That's your finish line. Get your grow on, and let's make this one for the history books. We will see you in the Growers Gauntlet, if you have what it takes.
It's going down, I'm your captain. It's going down, I'm your captain. It's going down, I'm your captain. It's going down, I'm your captain now. It's going down, it's going down, it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. I'm your captain now. It's going down.
So thanks for coming into our webinar. Today we're going to be talking about beneficial insects or biological control agents and how to utilize them in your garden. One of the things that we want to focus on specifically is spider mites. We want to know how to ID them, how to ID their population and sizes, and then how to either eradicate them or control them. One of the main tools that we're going to use is a particular mite called Persimilis. So these mites are voracious eaters of spider mites and are very good at eradicating infestations before they become a problem in your garden. So stick around, we're going to be discussing those mites and how you can get them for some great deals at growershouseauto.com.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Marco Jimenez. I'm the Director of Content here at Growers House and CannaCribs. Wanted to give a quick shout out to those folks that joined a little bit early. What's up, Thomas, Robert, Karen, Trey, Juan, Millard, Paradoxical, Nuno, Michael. Welcome to the early subscribers for today's webinar. Go ahead and leave comments and questions in the Q&A section or the chat, and we will try to get to them towards the end of the podcast. Keep calling it a podcast, webinar. So today's webinar is brought to us by growershouse.com, Growers House Auto, Beneficial Insectary, Stash Blend Premium Plant Additive, and Growers House Ag Solutions. Growers House Ag is our new initiative that we're doing at Growers House for enterprise kind of level support for commercial industry professionals. Give Renee and her team a call, and they will take care of you. Some of the new offerings that we have is a new B2B portal that we're going to be launching April 1st. If you sign up for the B2B portal, you get special pricing. You get submit quotes for bulk orders. You get order history, maintain order history for reference, and easy reorders. You get shopping lists, maintain shopping lists, multiple shipping addresses, multiple users, all the fun stuff you get from a commercial ag account. So now that's going to be April 1st. We're launching that on growershouse.com. Stay tuned for that. Let's see, a quick shout out to our CannaCribs fans out there that are watching. 282,000 subscribers at this point and growing. We do have some nice episodes that we're working on right now. Going to be in pre-production pretty soon on that. Coming quickly and feverishly, so we may be taking a break, I would imagine in May from these webinars, but we will continue to have more webinars if you guys are enjoying them, hoping you're finding them educational and informational. Another quick shout out to growershouse.com. Check out some of the new products that we have: Ventana Plant Science Cloning Gel, Common Culture Biotrellis Netting, and some Stash Blend. That's one of our sponsors for today. That's the micronutrient blend that our friends from the Stash over there are promoting with us. Okay, cool. So let me bring Mike in. We're going to start a little bit earlier with Mike to give a quick shout out. Hey, Mike, come on in. There he is.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going, Mike? So just wanted to quickly chat and give the audience a heads up on what to expect in today's webinar. And then maybe want to give a little bit of background for you and kind of, what you're doing here at Growers House and CannaCribs.
Yeah, sure. So today's webinar, I really want to do a deep dive into the most common pests and some of the more common reactionary plans you can have with beneficial bugs, and just implementing beneficial bugs into a growing environment in a more modern and a more kind of data-driven way. I'm Mike with the CannaCribs and Growers House team. I'm the in-house agronomist. I work with CannaCribs on the consulting side and obviously the media side as well. I came from ag, and now I am here in the one crop that is the most fun to grow, and glad to be joined by a lot of other guys in that same situation.
Nice. And could you explain to everybody what technical crop advisor means? I know we've been asked that a few times.
Yeah, so technical crop advisor is kind of, I guess, like our world's version of like maybe what a PCA would do in the normal ag world. We provide kind of agronomic consulting and recommendations. We provide metrics based on testing, things like that, so that growers and cultivations can make decisions based on data, based on the best course of action and really the best business decision for them.
Nice. And how does that integrate into the kind of the new Growers House ag model with regards to commercial accounts and kind of what folks can expect when they sign up, let's say through the B2B portal and that kind of stuff? Like, where would you come into the equation there?
Yeah, so for commercial cultivators that do sign up for our B2B portal, another thing that they have access to when they shop at Growers House is people like me, TCAs. And if they have any cultivation questions, or if they need product suggestions, if they have a question on like, what's a good light that's out right now under this budget, because I need this many of them, then we would be able to facilitate those options and then help Growers House kind of negotiate pricing and terms and things like that. We would try to make sure we would kind of integrate a good business decision along with kind of how you would want to grow and what the market can provide at the time.
Killer. Cool. Thank you for explaining that. Another quick shout out again to our friends, Stash Blend Rob with CLTV, Mr. Grow It, and Pigeons 420. They are helping us with the Stash Blend giveaway today. They are providing 4-ounce Stash Blend Premium. I'm going to be giving that away. So stick around to the end of the webinar, guys. We're going to do a quick random name generator, and we'll be giving 2 of those away to the audience. We also have some polls over here. So click on the polls button at the top right for you guys. There's some handouts there for products that Growers House sells. Just so stoked that you guys are all here. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and bow out here, Mike, and then allow you to introduce Will and Cody Seals from Beneficial Insectary. And then I'll catch you guys at the end for the giveaway and for the questions. So I'll talk to you guys afternoon. And here we go. Here we go. And Cody.
Hey, there they are. What's up, guys? So,
All right.
we got Will Batt from the TCA team in New Mexico, and then we have Cody Seals from Beneficial Insectary, our premier supplier of biological control agents. Cody, if you can introduce yourself, and then Will right after, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Hey, one, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Two, everyone, hello. My name is Cody Seals, U.S. Product Manager for Beneficial Insectary. Beneficial Insectary is one of North America's largest producer of beneficial insects, based in Redding, California, and excited to be here today. Thank you again for having me.
All right, Will.
Sweet. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I am also a technical advisor on the CannaCribs team, work in tandem with Mike and with a lot of our clients out through New Mexico, Missouri, Minnesota, some of the new emerging markets through the country. Here to assist cultivations with all of the many issues that arise through production. One of those issues that I help on often is integrated pest management. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Do a lot of work with Cody and definitely get a lot of Beneficial Insectary's products out there into cultivators' hands. So excited to talk about all that today.
Nice. Absolutely. We always call it spreading the good word of beneficials.
Yeah. Marco, if we can get that slideshow up, please, we can start going over some of that info. I want to get started kind of as soon as possible. We got a lot of info to cover here. This first slide here, basically, so one of the big things with using any of these biological control agents, honestly, any IPM regimen, any IPM program has to start with knowing what you're fighting. So Pest ID is one thing that I wanted to go over initially. One thing that I really wanted to have your kind of input on, Cody, is how to identify your pest insects and like the seasonality of these pest insects.
Yeah. So just diving in, one way you can identify your pests are what are your crop? What are you working on? Depending on the crop you're in, it can be a very specific pest. We'll use the cannabis aphid, for instance. As of currently, it is really the only crop known to be affected is cannabis with the cannabis aphid. So if you're working in mums, it's unlikely if you run into an aphid, it's going to be a cannabis aphid. It could be the green peach. It could be foxglove, potato, various different ones. And the best way to really probably know from a general standpoint some of your pests are, one, work with people like your TCA advisor at Grower's House to get that info. And then also really sometimes local extension agencies. I mean, those government entities put out usually great resources that can be tailored to your geographic area that talk about what are the big pests you run into. And then they'll even go into the seasonality of that, which they'll talk about, early season, you might run into thrip issues when you're looking at young tissue. Later in the season, you might run into more aphid issues after they've developed or something's worked up the coast. If maybe you're in an area where a pest doesn't overwinter, but historically it works into there towards the end of each season. So yeah, man, just really leaning on people like your TCA advisor and then also working with different government entities can usually be great for that kind of info.
Awesome. And on this slide here, we just got a couple of, so we have all of our kind of beneficial guys on the, it's a mix of our pest bugs and our beneficials. And then obviously on the bottom here, we have all of our beneficials. This is kind of important. I believe, I know these slide decks are going to be available. So please email us if after this webinar, if you want this slide deck, because I think making sure you have these images so that you can positively ID your enemies is kind of so important at this point, because you could waste a lot of time and money trying to chase the wrong species with the wrong beneficial, I feel. Will, so in New Mexico, I know you work with a lot of like outdoor and greenhouse guys. What's kind of one of the main pests that you're seeing in New Mexico, for example? And like, what are some of the ways that guys out there are kind of maybe doing something unique to scout for that? And Marco, if we can go to the next slide.
Totally, Mike. Yeah. So, what I do see very often, especially with a lot of the greenhouse and outdoor producers, is there's some pretty heavy aphid populations out here. Yeah. Also, spider mites are pretty rampant, man. what it comes down to is there's a lot of people that are, sharing genetics with the farm down the road, getting some clones from the buddy and bringing it into their commercial production. And that's where oftentimes we see a lot of these populations start to really explode, especially in indoor cultivations where you have a few more barriers to help keep some of those insects out.
Yeah.
But I would say that probably one of the biggest, one of the insects that has one of the biggest economic impacts out here for outdoor and greenhouse cultivators would have to be like cabbage loopers or corn earworms. It's those caterpillars that really bore through the buds and can create a breeding ground for botrytis to start to take hold in the garden. So that's definitely a tough one, and I feel like oftentimes people are always trying to react when they see them, but not having proper plans in place to help prevent them from becoming an issue in the first place.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Is like once you see those if you see like second level instar or third level instar loopers, I feel like you're too late. Like things are happening in those buds that is going to be really bad 2-3 weeks from now. Marco, if we can actually, so there's a couple of our pest bugs on this slide, those loopers, of course, tiny little clear aphid. If we can go to the next slide, I think this is a really important slide for people to see. So one of the cool things that I was able to get from Cody is this life cycle chart here. And that shows us like what life cycle and what target organism should we use during that life cycle for thrips. Because thrips is one of those weird things that there's a canopy instar stage, then they drop down to pupate in the media, then they come back out as flowers. It's like a 3D environment of like pest control that you have to consider with thrips. So having something like this life stage chart where you know what to apply, where in the grow, at what period in the infestation is so important. And, minute pirate bugs being one of the more important tools. Cody, can you talk a little bit more about like how it's important? Like we have aureus circled on these specific spots. Why are they circled on these specific spots?
Yeah. So, wanted to kind of lean into that one to talk about how the aureus is able to go after multiple life stages. If you'll notice on that chart, you'll also see the Swirsky, which can go into a higher instar as well. But what it's not ever going to go after is that adult stage. Yeah. That's what's nice about the aureus is you're able to really attack it in multiple stages. And it's a very mobile BCA. So it's really able to get in there. It's able to find the thrips. It's a wonderful one. And the other thing that we can probably talk about a little bit on that life chart is part of the idea behind that is to really drill home with growers that when you're looking at a pest, you want to try and go after multiple stages of that life cycle. Using thrips as an example, you have the BCAs in the beginning, you have the macro BCAs at the end, but what about that middle? What can you use to go after that? Well, you can use certain things like Stratio and various soil pests, but a good drench of something like a Bavaria or an Isaria can really help go after some of those pupal stages. Similar with things like root aphids. It's just finding, how many ways can we skin this? That's IPM, right? Integrated Pest Management.
And it's all about, I believe it's on one of these later slides, but it's all about balancing the ecological effects, the costs in the grow, like all of these things. So like holistically, I think you mentioned this earlier in one of our talks, getting a little bit of percentage in each one of these life cycles adds up over the course of the entire grow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's when you're looking at your pest, it's a pie, and it's like, how many ways can you attack that pie? Can you get 30% of the eggs, 30% of the larva, and 30% of the adults? Well, you just dealt with 90% of your problem. And you kept yourself under that economic threshold, hopefully, that entire time. Yeah, you can't just look at it in one facet.
Right. Awesome. Next slide, please. So going along that trend of kind of like reactionary bugs. So we know that aureus is like really good. It's one of the key predators against thrips, and thrips is pretty bad right now. I know right now, as we're getting warmer, we're going to start to see white flies and aphids pop up. So we have our chrysoperla as our reactionary there. Obviously, spider mites in your drier areas like New Mexico for Will is going to pop up. So we're going to need Persimilis. Like as far as lacewing larvae, I know you've been pushing quite a bit of lacewing larvae out to New Mexico because of the aphids, Will. Can you talk about like how effective those can be? And Cody, please back him up if you have any information.
Yeah, totally, Mike. So, oftentimes for more preventative plans, I really like to recommend the lacewing egg cards. They're very cheap. They're very inexpensive. They're easy to spread throughout the grow. Those eggs will very quickly hatch into the larvae, which will make their way through the canopy. But I really like, running the lacewing larvae in tandem with heavy scouting. So being able to have eyes through the garden to know where your hotspots are arising and use those lacewing larvae for direct hotspot treatment. That's been an incredibly effective tool for treating aphid populations in tandem with some sprays to keep populations down in veg. And also relying on those cards to get a little bit of a wider spread throughout the canopy, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And the larvae are so nice because they just immediately go to work. It's like the eggs are good because they are cheap. You can put a lot of them out. But sometimes it's like if you are in that reactionary phase, maybe going after the larva can be good because what you're putting out there is immediately eating. There's no download time, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they're pretty hungry out of the tube. So I've seen as soon as you spread, they just go right to the aphids, which is nice too because they're not like ambling around. They're going right to their food source.
It's honestly pretty fun to watch. Once you apply them, they're they get right out there and start really starting to decimate some of the
Persimilis is the same way. Like spider mites are a very, very pervasive issue. It's hard to get rid of all of them with chemical sprays, but it is easy to spot the hot spots because obviously you get webbing. So Persimilis, like Cody, would you basically apply it as a hotspot treatment as well?
Absolutely. It is something you can come in preventatively, but it does work very well as a hotspot treatment because they're such voracious eaters. Again, you can somewhat use them preventatively, but you're typically using them preventatively in a scenario where spider mites are coming no matter what. Outdoor settings, various places like that. In an indoor setting, there are a couple mites that, somebody could kind of work with the grower house team to probably dial in something that might be better from a preventative standpoint. Right. But from a hotspot, they're great. I mean, we even have that little applicator you can see in the bottom right-hand corner where you can go through. Yeah. And their natural tendency to run up works really well with that bottle. So you can just sort of touch it to the areas where you're having those hotspots and just let them go and watch them just start feasting.
Yeah.
The other big point to mention here is that oftentimes, especially with spider mites, we see if cultivators are not going through and scouting consistently, we really start to see them becoming a big issue later in flower. They're like midway through the flower phase when we do not want to spray anything on our plants. And that's where it's, our hands are pretty tied. We only have so many tools, and having something like Persimilis where we're not spraying pesticides on our already budding product is an incredibly helpful tool at that stage of development.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because it goes in tandem. You also, let's say in theory, there was something you could spray late in flower. You don't want to because you don't want that added humidity on your buds.
Exactly.
So it's like at this point, me personally, when I was growing more, it was like that week 2, week 3 of flower, I started coming in heavy with my BCAs. So that way I could sort of ride out that wave until week 7, week 8 when it was time to harvest.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where like a lot of the programs that I end up recommending to a lot of our clients, we do rely a little bit more on some sprays and veg in tandem with targeted beneficials. And then we really rely on the beneficials for the majority of the flowering phase. If we can get away without spraying anything past week 2 of flower, that's a good run.
Oh, it is. Because it's like the hairs, they start turning brown. It's like you can notice when you've sprayed, even if you don't get any phyto. It's like you can tell it was there.
And you also brought it up, Cody. It's even if it is technically a safe product that you can apply later in flower, you're still spiking the humidity of the room and creating more grounds for botrytis.
And putting residuals. So many of these, pest control products that we see out on the market these days, you crack open the bottle and it smells like pine sol or it smells like some minty blend, like that residual, it will definitely affect the flower quality in the end. And it will affect the way it cures because, it's basically you have weird botanical oils on the surface. So
and the way that it extracts, a lot of people moving all that product straight into extract, really do not want any pesticide residues.
Marco, next slide. So now that we talked about aureus for your thrips. We have chrysoperla for our aphids and, insects, whiteflies. We have our persimmilus for our spider mite issues. So say that we're done reacting to the pests that we have, and we have some historical data, like I got spider mites really bad. I know I got to use persimmilus. What would be ways, or like say I got aphids really bad. Now we have to shift to like a proactive plan of prevention. Like I know on that thrip chart, we had Swirsky and cucumbers in the earlier stages for thrips. Like, what are some ways that people can use their historical pest data to plan a preventive plan in the next cycles?
Yeah, I'll dive into that if you don't mind. I mean, part of that is really building out the best data you can. Figuring out, is there a, let's say you're a multi-bay grow. It's like, is there a certain bay that runs into this issue more often than others? Are we not mowing the side of a hill that we should be? That is just pulling things into that closest bay that we're not realizing it? Is that a different crew that maybe, somebody at home is growing that maybe shouldn't be and is pulling things in? It's like the better data you can have to look at to figure out, well, when are we running into these seasonality issues? When are we seeing this? When were the spikes, and how do we get ahead of it using things like cucumbers? It's like, if you don't get a good grasp on scouting, monitoring, and building out that seasonality plan, you'll almost always be in that reactionary phase. So it's like getting into that preventative phase really requires dedicated scouting and monitoring, and then time, because you have to build a basis.
Right.
Yeah, I've had some cultivators, create heat maps and really track how populations arise in bays or rooms throughout the production. And then as we start to map that data, we can see exactly, okay, so the thrip populations continue to spike in this area of this room. And then we break it down. It's like, oh, it's because the fertigation technician comes in to check that row every day and is, spreading those insects. And so then that gives us, an actionable plan as to how to, better treat that area, and maybe talk to Jeff to not be, moving from room to room without changing clothes.
Or get him a Tyvek suit or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But that metric,
It's huge for that. It's like you say, it's like figuring out where that linchpin is. Is it in your veg? Is it in your flower? Where are you running into those pest issues is the most important thing you can figure out. And then also identifying your number one pests. Sometimes, you might have thrips, but maybe that's not your real issue. So what is the real culprit here?
Right. Yeah. What is actually breaking those economic thresholds and affecting your crop? Yeah. Because I know lots of guys with thrips, but I've walked through their canopy and it's like, they're there,
Yeah, totally. It's like, man, your thrips are here, but these broad mites are the real issue.
Exactly. Or like I lift up the root cube and like I see like a black cloud come out. It's like, maybe we'll deal with the fungus gnats instead of the couple of thrips.
Yeah. And
next slide, Marco. Go ahead.
You guys have tossed around the term economic threshold a good bit, which I think is a really important thing to really stress, is that, eradication is not always our goal here. Eradication can be very expensive. And sometimes the best plan of action, especially with something like thrips or fungus gnats, is to just keep the populations at a level where it is not affecting our bottom line. It's not affecting, our product and our yields.
Absolutely. And that's one of the number one things with the 5 principles of IPM. It's probably why it's number one. It's like potentially injurious organisms should exist at tolerable levels. And that tolerable level depends on each grower. But like you're saying, Will, it's like if your tolerable level is 0, it's going to be extremely expensive to eradicate. And that's sometimes how I've met people and they've stepped on that pesticide treadmill, where they're like, all right, okay, one more Zero-Tol spray, one more azadirachtin spray. This is going to do it. This is this one. And it's like, guys, your Pyganic stopped working 6 sprays ago. It's like spending money you're on the pesticide treadmill. So it's like, take a step back and figure out what can we do here to lower these numbers, but not shoot for 0.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of the times, it is a cultural practice, and a lot of these guys don't have the proper kind of SOPs or kind of, honestly, business plan in place, like a perpetual harvest room. If you have a perpetual harvest room, we're going to have threshold limits for pests, because it's nearly impossible to do like a full wipe of any perpetual harvest room without shutting it out of production for 2 months, and if or however much it takes to get a good clean and a refill in that room with new stock. So it's like we just have to maintain certain levels, and these five key principles I think are super important, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us, Cody. But that was the one thing that I wanted people to understand is like, you don't have to be at zero. You have to be at a controlled level of any pest that you have. And honestly, if you're at zero, that means your facility design is probably more important and more locked in than the actual IPM program.
If you're at zero, it's because your cultural controls are on point.
Right. Or you're a brand new grow. I don't know.
Yes.
I always joke. If somebody tells me they have
true.
pest issues, I either say you're not growing enough or you haven't been doing it long enough.
Right.
It's one of, and I'm not saying big guys, don't get it dialed in, but I doubt you're going to run across any large grow that has quite literally zero pest issues. They've just found ways to mitigate them and can potentially run an extremely successful grow at, minimal levels of pests.
Yeah. And, looking at pests, if we want to go to the next slide, Marco. So all of this kind of like we know how to react to things. Now that we know how to react to things, we kind of can create a plan to make preventative plans. But all of that kind of hinges on our ability to ID the pests and ID any changes or monitor the numbers and the threshold numbers. So scouting and monitoring. I know, Cody, this is something very near and dear to you. Will, this is something that you try to harp on all the time. Same with me. So Cody, like what are some of the kind of standard ways to scout and kind of tips for success in scouting for bugs?
Absolutely. One, do it often. Do it often and have a plan. Have a plan where, you're maybe not walking the same row each week. Maybe you're not walking the same row each day. If you're a heavy scout program, it's figuring out the best way to attack the room to get a good feel for it without walking every step. And that can kind of depend on the grow, can depend on the size, but just first getting a work through on how to best attack it. And after that, to me, it's going as digital as possible personally. Even if you have an Excel sheet on a pad that somebody can walk around and tally things up, like spider mites in this row, spotted cucumber beetle in this other row. It's like being able to do that is nice because then it carries right over to a digital data set that you can analyze. The problem with some of the low techs, like just walk through is basically gut. That's you going, I feel like I have a lot of spider mites.
Right.
The pen and pad is still low tech, but it's at least a little better. You're walking through and you're marking it. But the problem there is you're breaking Ohio. Ohio is, for anyone who's not aware of that acronym, it's only handle it once. With data, that is super important because the more times you handle it, not only are you running up your labor, you're also increasing your accidental chance to mess up. Somebody accidentally reads a 2 when it was a 7. You were out in the field and you got dirt on your paper. Now you're trying to rub it off and you've ruined almost the last 50 minutes of work because you're just smearing mud on it. I've been there. I've done that. And it's like the way to work away from that is to try and use some of that, the digital monitoring when you can. So that way you're only handling it once and you're just in a real time being able to access that data and break down those charts.
Awesome. Yeah. And as we're getting a little bit more and more high tech, I feel like I'm hoping that cultivations are going to start implementing things like that, giving people more smart devices to do this type of scouting, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a facility and they can't tell me, they don't have any record of what they were, fighting, what they were applying, which is a huge compliance issue in and of itself. But the record keeping aspect of it is kind of one of the biggest tools of IPM. And you're right, like getting it digitized is probably the easiest way to make sure that information stays persistent and then it becomes actionable in the future.
Yeah. And when we can really assimilate that data, when we have months of data saying, this is often, the phase, this is the time in our rooms when issues arise. These are the places that we typically see issues arise. Mm-hmm. That means your scouting team can go through even faster and more efficiently because they know where to start looking.
Right. Mm-hmm. And especially in like those greenhouse or even outdoor settings where, like the south end gets this and the north end gets that, like, makes it a lot simpler to plan out the regimen for the rest of the year, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Next slide, Marco. Last slide. Oh, sorry, Cody. Go ahead.
You're good. I was just going to say it's also good for sometimes, especially if you're a multi-state operator. it's one of those things where now you're not, if you're the IPM manager for multiple locations, you're not having to call each scout and be like, hey, how did you feel about the spider mites in Bay 2? How were the thrips in Bay 3? It's like, no, they're just able to compile all this into a shared spreadsheet that you're able to just take in, download, process.
Right. You know, what I even like doing was as the scouts would go through, they would have different colored tags for different afflictions, placing the tag in the canopy so that when the flower crew or when anyone else is walking the room and they see the orange tag, they put eyes on it and can report that information back to the scouts. So that we can treat those hot spots faster and we have more eyes looking through the garden.
I feel like that's a remnant of the tomato industry, because the tomato industry used to do that all the time. You'd see guys with like that colored tape. They had like 3 different colors and they'd mark up that row, you know, mites or this or that. So it's good that these IPM practices are shifting over to our medicinal plant industry.
No, it's great. It is. Takes a team.
This last slide is really cool, and I really appreciate you getting us this media, but the sign versus the symptom. This is one thing that a lot of people, I feel, miss when it comes to positive ID of their pests. And I really want to touch on this before we kind of end this slideshow, because this all, like I said, everything hinges on being able to ID what you're fighting. So if you could talk, both of you guys, if you guys could give me a good example of like seeing the signs versus the symptoms in some of these different pests and like how you've helped people diagnose the right problem.
I'll start first. But something like a thrips, they're small, they're very mobile. You know, even though they're not going long distances, they're covering those short distances fast. So sometimes when you start looking at leaves, when you're looking, they're really good about flipping over and getting under the underside. So if it's a grower who's new at scouting, they might be looking around and they're like, I don't really see anything, but there's clearly damage here. It's like, well, some of the things you can look for with thrips are what we call rasping, which is where they've almost scraped that top layer of chlorophyll off. They haven't punctured it all the way through like a true de-leafer, but they haven't skeletonized it. All they've done is really rasped it. They've scraped off that top chlorophyll. And then you also see little black dots, which would be their frass. And it's looking for these signs, hopefully before you hit symptoms, because your symptoms are really when problems have arisen. That's when you're now seeing contorted growth on leaves. That's when you're seeing diseases spread. So you're always trying to look for those signs of what's been left behind, kind of like little breadcrumbs.
And that picture right here on the thrips, we see those like little rasped areas on the leaf, and then we see that black frass. So like once you see those two signs or those two symptoms or signs, then you can kind of determine like this is thrip at this point.
Yeah, and if it's gotten to that point, that's bad. That's
right.
That is
you're past the threshold limit for that.
Yeah.
Totally, and that's why sometimes signs and symptoms can kind of bleed together a little bit.
Yeah,
right.
One tool that I liked using to see the signs before they turn into symptoms was equipping scouts with a high-powered flashlight to basically run that under the canopy to shine through the leaves. And it's a little bit easier to see, they still have to have a trained eye, but a little bit easier to see if there is an aphid on the undersurface of the leaf, or, sometimes you can see a thrip shining through the leaf. But
yeah, I would always tell people, especially in indoor environments, when they're scouting as they're walking through the road, don't look down on the leaves, like get down and then look at the lights through the leaves. And then you can always find the pock marks of either insects or damage. So using light is a huge thing, because those leaves, you can get light penetration, but not through a bug.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we are close to the end. And obviously the last thing was the aphids. If you see sooty black mold, times are bad. Yeah.
And totally. That's one of the ones where signs and symptoms can almost start being the same thing. Broad mites. Once you start seeing the contorted growth of plants, it's like, is that a sign or a symptom? It's like, well, it's kind of both, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have some time for Q&A. I think Marco's going to rejoin us here, but fungus gnats. Everyone has fungus gnats, but I think one of the key takeaways is what we said earlier. It's going to be a lot to get rid of them completely. You want a program that keeps their numbers down, like in a natural situation, their numbers would be down. So, Cody, Will, like fungus gnats, what's your guys' go-to?
I mean, Stratiolaelaps and Delocia are two very helpful tools in gardens to manage fungus gnat populations. If we've got a very heavy fungus gnat population, some drenches of BTI typically goes a long way, something like Natrol. But then using those stratiolaelaps and rove beetles to continue to keep populations in check. But once again, we want to manage those populations to the point and use those beneficials more as a preventative. One thing that I love about both of those is that they do a really good job of continuing to build populations, especially in like a living soil environment. Some of these living soil cultivators will, apply once, and 6 months down the line, they'll still be seeing, rove beetles running through the soil.
And that's another big consideration is the media of the plant that we're growing. Yeah, I wouldn't use the same type of drenches in like a rockwool substrate as I would a cocoa substrate. Like I really wouldn't bother with nematodes in a 6x6 rockwool, but I've definitely put nematodes down in a cocoa or a soil. So yeah, I think that is definitely a good point. Is the media consideration?
Absolutely,
Cody,
they all have their pros and cons.
Cody, any silver bullets for fungus gnats other than just regular?
Man, I think Will really hit it. Attacking it multiple ways. That BTI drench with heavy populations, Delocher, Stratio, and then also nematodes are another example you can use, as well as honestly probably looking at how often you're irrigating. How that's probably the number. That's one of the big things is. Are you irrigating a little too much? Because fungus gnats can maybe be the start of your issue, but then all of a sudden you're working into Pythium, Fusarium, all kinds of issues that can just cascade from overwatering.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing too. Is it a symptom of something else in the grow? And then thank you for bringing that up. That's a huge point with fungus gnats. Is a lot of the times guys are irrigating every single day. They never get any good root zone dryback. They have a thick layer of algae growing on the top of all of their pots and stuff. Like that's food for the fungus gnats. So you're creating a positive fungus gnat environment. Of course, you're going to have fungus gnats. So the cultural practices are huge.
One other thing that I'll mention on fungus gnats is that for the most part, they're a nuisance. As long as their populations are kept relatively in check, where they can be a pretty big economic issue is when you have tiered cultivations and you have bad fungus gnat pressures up on that top tier. Those fungus gnats make their way down, get stuck in the sticky trichomes of that lower tier. And then you've got trimmers that are trying to pick out all these little fungus gnats out of the buds.
I'm sure there's like a ton more considerations, especially if you're doing dual tier when it comes to this type of when it comes to IPM in general, because of that root zone next to canopy action there.
Cool. Thanks, guys. That was a lot of great information. Let's jump into the Q&A. There's another question here from Paradoxical Outcome. Let's see. Beneficial friends in the soil bed. Now they're established. How do I keep them happy and full? That's a good question. How do you feed your beneficial friends?
Hopefully with pests. I mean, in theory, them starving is best case scenario, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the thing. It's like when your soldiers have no war to fight, things are good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, though, there are products you can use to try and get those populations higher. Yeast products for things like the lacewing for them to feed on. There are diets, augmented diets you can put out there during times of maybe slow pest pressure. That in trap plant, banker plants, putting out pollen sources for them is huge, especially for things like Aureus.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. A lot of these beneficials that we utilize are omnivores, so we can actually have banker plants and have a persistent source of Aureus because we know we're going to have a persistent threat of thrips, things like that. So planning out a banker plant system, getting the right BCAs in the area might be just as important as applying to your actual canopy.
Totally. I mean, that's like putting beneficial plants outdoors can help bring in natural predators that you might not even have had you not planted these things outdoors.
Right.
And Cody, BI sells some of these banker plants too, correct?
We do, absolutely. Yeah. Well, what we sell, one of them is the it's like an oat mix essentially, and it's for aphids. It's so you can build out a bird cherry oat aphid on the grass basically, and because it's a monocot, that aphid's not going to work over into your cannabis. It's that aphid will only sit on that grass. Then you can use that to build up parasitoid wasp populations, then release those. So it's sort of a way to build up your populations before you even release them, which is a great thing that people are getting into now. Plus, it's fun. You get to see the whole life cycle right there, and it really allows you to understand what's going on here.
Right. And I would say the wasps would probably get higher and higher efficacy every generation that they're out in those banker plants as well,
Yeah, because they're getting accustomed to the environment.
Right.
Really, only the fittest are surviving.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool.
So there's a great question from Karen. Apparently, she probably lives somewhere a lot colder than I do. But how do you guys suggest overwintering beneficials? What do you guys do in the winter?
Generally, though, if they're the species to overwinter in your area, they will by default, right, Cody?
Yeah, there's certain things you can do that definitely help beneficials in your area. Don't pick up all your leaves too early. Those are overwintering sites. If you have a pollinator garden, don't cut it down too early and tear it up. It's really usually good to wait until it's warmed up slightly in late winter or early spring. Just giving these things, not basically destroying their refuge, can help.
Right.
That's great. Okay, that's great advice. Thank you. It looks like Ron has a question about silica. How does silica help guard against pests?
Oh yeah, it's a very common thing in ag. It helps strengthen cell wall, especially against like chewing insects like loopers or caterpillars. It can kind of help deter them or slow them down. I would say probably more fungal resistance. But what are your guys' experience with calcium and silica and just general plant health?
Yeah, I mean, I typically recommend some calcium and silica additives to some of the IPM programs that I recommend. But as you said, Mike, I see a little bit more resistance towards fungal pathogens. Curious if you have any other guidance on that, Cody.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, you do kind of get that silica layer built up on the cuticle, but a lot of plant feeding insects, I'm not going to say it might not make it a little more difficult for them, but I've personally never seen it necessarily deter them. But it's still great. Yeah, great for fungal issues. It helps put that silica layer on top, acts as a bit of like a desiccant. And then things like calcium are great because a lot of times most plants don't really move a lot of calcium into their flowers. There's some great research that's come out in using calcium sprays in petunias for botrytis control because you're essentially strengthening those cell walls with the liquid calcium, and then it's reducing your botrytis.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing in our medicinal plant industry as well, is like trying to deliver that calcium without too much nitrates towards the end of cycle because, we know the positive benefits of calcium, but it's hard to break it when it's 19% calcium and 15% nitrogen, but that's a whole different conversation.
I know like BioWorks has their On Guard calcium is a really good product.
Right. Yeah. And other companies make like calcium supplements like that.
Yeah.
One thing, there's a cool kind of feeder or a banker plant question that Robert asked. So monocot aphids can't feed on dicots. And Cody, can you just talk quickly about like the importance of knowing why we do our species ID, why we do our pest ID, and like how certain pests are very specific to either the plants or the bug that they attack?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will start because I see Robert's question as well. The bird cherry oat aphid is specifically what I'm talking about. I don't necessarily want to call it a monocot aphid. There are likely aphids that can probably go after monocots and dicots, but using the bird cherry oat aphid as an example, it is specialized. It deals with the plant nutritional aspect of what that aphid is taking. It deals with the type of stylet that it has, that it's actually using to puncture. There's a lot of physiological things that essentially adhere that aphid to that monocot. And that's why we use that one specifically in our banker plant programs.
Right. It's like Jurassic Park where it can't leave that monocot ecosystem because it just doesn't have the ability to eat, feed, and thrive on any other real plant other than that.
Yeah, there's absolutely. I mean, there's insects who, if they don't get certain, like back when we were doing a lot of research into weeds in crops, there's insects out there that basically to complete their life cycle, they've got to leave your corn, hop down to a specific weed, and then come back up, or it just wouldn't work. And so that's when all of a sudden, okay, well, we really need to make sure we keep this a clean field because that will help reduce certain insects.
Awesome.
And it looks like there's a question from Paradoxical Outcome again, who's also super active in the chat, and looks like they know what they're talking about. But back to maybe the housing over winter. Do you guys consider housing for these insects, or do they just find a natural place to bed down? I think is the question.
It kind of depends. Oh, sorry. It kind of depends if it's like an indoor cultivation. If we're talking about a relatively sterile, indoor farm, we're going to be reapplying these beneficial insects cycle after cycle. That being said, like I had mentioned, there are a lot of cultivations that are moving more towards the living soil model these days. And that's where you are creating a little bit more of an ecosystem where they can, at least soil-based beneficials can continue to propagate and build populations.
Effective mulching, I would say. Yeah. If you're in a situation where you're trying to keep these beneficials around in a long-term bed, I would say mulching is super huge.
Mm-hmm. Keeping that moisture at correct levels is very important.
Yeah.
Cool. So in the chat, Millard is asking about pill bugs and earwigs in their indoor garden. Should they be concerned? Is the question.
Pill bugs, maybe not so much.
It's one of those things that they're detritus eaters. They're not really in there eating your plants. So a good rule of thumb is generally they're just kind of bystanders. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to take a look at maybe how much detritus you're building up. Like if you have a lot of leaf litter and you have a lot of pill bugs and earwigs, maybe that is a problem. Maybe you have too much, you just have too much plant waste building up, if you will. But I would say generally those are not issues. It's kind of like springtails. We get a lot of requests on Instagram of people talking about springtails. Like, what is this? What is in my grow? And while those are typically considered bystanders, something I used to run into in the greenhouse when I grew a lot more was I noticed I had higher springtails in my pots that were drying out a little too much. And that's because my roots were likely having died back, which gave the springtails something to eat. So if you're in a greenhouse soil setting and you feel like you have a lot of springtails, maybe you need to crack open some pots and see, well, what are your roots doing? Even though your plants seem healthy, are you accidentally letting them get too dry? You're having root dieback, and then that's where those populations are coming from. So they might be a sign that something else is happening.
Totally.
Great. And then Nathan's asking in the chat, I'm not sure what this means. Is there bankers that attract beneficials naturally?
Yeah. Mullein, different pepper plants like flash pepper. There's a list we could share with. I'm sure if somebody wants to contact Will or Mike, we can definitely share a list of kind of the most heinous offenders, if we will, for beneficial plants to put out there.
Nice. It looks like we get this question a lot as far as frass. I know that word, frass, beneficial poop on the plants. Is that a thing? Is that a concern when testing, or if we're talking cannabis? Does that ever show up? I mean,
it's not a concern. Not benefit or BCA frass is not a concern. The frass from what we're applying generally will not be a concern. The concern is frass from your pest population. Like if you have aphids or if you have thrips and they're putting down black frass, that is an issue not only because they're throwing down frass, but also because they're damaging the plant. If you have a beneficial BCA population, the only frass that they're going to put out directly correlates to how many pests that they're going to eat, which reduces the pressure on your plants. So in my experience, I've never seen applying beneficial biological control agents increase like the dirtiness of the final product. If anything, getting them on there reduces the problems that you would get from your pest insects, because those are going to cause more plant damage and frass and any issues more than the beneficials themselves anyway.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, you have things like caterpillars, which, they're frass. It's massive. It just sits there and it rots your butt away. So it's like if you're not releasing little trichogram of wasp to try and reduce those numbers, your pest frass is going to far outnumber your beneficial.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then look at the the honeydew produced by aphids, what they're leaving behind, and that perfect sugary food for molds to grow.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Will.
No, one that I wanted to kind of touch on, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, Cody, but oftentimes, I go into gardens and people are like, oh yeah, I went down to the local garden center. I picked up some ladybugs. I'm running some beneficial insects. In my experience, I haven't found the highest efficacy with ladybugs, and a lot of them are non-native species that people are picking up from their garden centers. But I'd be curious to hear you chat on that, Cody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you just said is huge. And it's one of the reasons we do not sell the typical lady beetle that you might find in garden stores. They are they're naturally harvested. People go out and they collect them where they're overwintering. So you're not only damaging those local populations, you're then moving these around with typically very little testing. I'm not going to say there's not a BCA company out there testing. There might be, but generally they're not when it comes to these lady beetles. They're just collecting these in the wild. Then you're moving who knows what diseases, potential mite issues that they've collected, who knows what problems you could be moving into your local environment. And kind of also like you touched on how they seem to move a lot. They do. They're very transient BCA. So it's like you hear people talk about how they'll release them at night. The next morning, they've already moved on. It's like they're I don't want to bash them too bad because they're kind of like the gateway drug into BCAs a little bit. It's like you'll talk to somebody and they've never used one, but they're like, oh, I've used lady beetles and I've used praying mantis. That counts, right? And it's like, sure. That's a great start, buddy. Where can we go from there?
Yeah. I mean, they're understanding the concept that I can use other bugs to kill these bugs. Now we have to focus in, on that.
And I feel like lady beetles are always the first thing that we hear about in those early gardening classes, But when we get to more, targeted approaches, we have much better solutions.
No, totally, man. I mean, I've been there in my early days. I was the guy in the greenhouse watching another guy pour Coca-Cola on some of them. And he's like, no, this is how we get them to stay. And it's like, all right, sure, buddy. All right, I believe you.
Yeah, no, I picked up some praying mantis and ladybugs but that was when I had a small greenhouse. I actually had a bad aphid infestation, and I was able to close all the windows and spend a few days in there with the lady beetles. And they definitely helped. So it depends. But yeah, outdoor, they're gone. And I'm in Southern California here, and I mostly deal with the little caterpillars that come in and do kind of start eating the big buds at the top. And I've been a tough time combating those. But I'm probably going to put up my greenhouse again. So. Well, cool, guys. We're kind of rounding the webinar out here. We're just about time, which means we're going to do our giveaway. But did you guys want to maybe summarize anything, or Cody, anything you want to throw in there towards the end here? Close it out.
Hey, I'll throw out a thank you again for having me on here. It's been a great experience. And remember, guys, scout and monitor, and scout and monitor. You got to do that.
Scout, monitor, and Pest ID. Make sure that you know what you're dealing with, and chat with someone who can help you out with that for sure.
And we are here for you. So if you have any questions, let us know. Feel free to shoot us emails, shoot us calls, texts. We are happy to help you guys use these more effective, less environmentally, dangerous ways to control the pest population in your crops. We have to step up our game in every aspect in this industry, and this is one of the huge steps, I think, for medicinal plant growers.
Nice. Okay, great. Well, thanks, guys. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it, guys. For those that joined us, thank you very much. Again, to get a hold of the guys through Growers House Auto is one way. So that's growershouseauto.com, growershouse.com, or CannaCribs.org. You can reach out to Mike and Will there. And then Cody, obviously, you can get a hold of him through the Beneficial Insectary website. I'm going to go ahead and call it a day here, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.